Hey, welcome to Trendsetters Table. Today we have an extra special guest. We have the founder of Diamanté, who has an amazing background before founding this company. Cambridge, UCL, went to Cordon Bleu, almost worked for a 3-star Michelin chef, level 3 wine, worked at some of the biggest banks in the world. So thank you so much, Brian, for having us on, or having you join us. We're really super excited to have you. So
thanks for having me.
Yeah. So why don't you start by giving us a little bit of background? I mean, you have achieved so much in your life and your career before starting this company. Like, how did you get started? From London back to Hong Kong. Like, tell us a little bit about the journey.
Sure. So I'll say I'm someone who doesn't like to comply with status quo. That's a very good way of summarizing myself. And I guess my life has been a journey of a lot of different paths in line. So I do like to take my hobbies quite seriously. And as you can hear, I do start with a very variety. So after graduating from Cambridge studying economics, I managed to enter an investment bank, got a return offer in trading, which is very Hong Kong typical. Then I kind of had the chance to my parents give me the liberty to do whatever I want for my gap year. So I took this chance, go to Paris and learn how to cook. Luckily, I also got a scholarship, so I did finish the whole diploma in Paris. And during my time, I did meet some very prestige people in culinary art, and eventually I managed to find myself in the kitchen of Ellen Passad and convincing him to give me an offer to work there. Unfortunately, it clashes with my trading career, so I did give it a pass. But one thing that I really appreciate is before that, I also managed to take opportunity to work in Bordeaux, learning from the best of the best BPHR group, like the Moutons and the Damiac and the Clémelon, and learn exactly how they grow, they pick, they make the wines, exactly what different plots in terroir changes the wine, and how do they actually create the nuances vintage by vintage. So I think from an F&B point of view, I'm kind of blessed in having the opportunity to learn there, and the advantage of being in Europe, I guess. After that, I did 2.5 years trading rates in London before coming back to Hong Kong, starting a bit on my own fundamental quantitative projects for like 3 years. And after that, or concurrently, I managed to land a job in Credit Suisse doing a very similar thing. So it's kind of like hobby and job joining hand in hand, which is kind of lucky. And after working in Credit Suisse for 2.5 years on Continental, I realized that I'm a bit still weak on the fundamental side. So I spent another 2.5 years in UBS doing that, doing fundamental, working on internet and software, which is where the market or the focus is, right? It's kind of interesting then how I started Diamanté, because luckily enough, I have some uncles who are in the industry, who able to have connections and guide me into very close connections with suppliers, who are able to source me at a very discounted rate, which I started my B2B path. And last year, I have then started my retail side, which our store is near Times Square, a few minutes walk from there. But we also have a B2C side, which we had 3 biggest advantage of our store. One, I believe we had the biggest stockpile in terms of fancy cuts in Hong Kong. Number 2, our color diamonds, especially pink diamonds, in my opinion, is one of the best that you'll find.
Look at that. Wow.
Definitely.
And lastly, it's about craftsmanship. I guess it's also coming very much from a guy's point of view. I like to have things with multiple usage. So, for example, some of the earrings here, it could turn to a pendant. The ring could turn to a pendant. Working on different rings and earrings that could have like 3, 5, or even 7 different usage. That's what we want. And we like to have a Lego concept. So we like to gamify jewelry as well. So you can build from level 1 to level 2, and everything during the process and the celebration, they all adds up into even a bigger piece. So we want to grow with our customer, and that is where Diamanté is. We hope everyone could have their own affordable jewelry that's specific for themselves, through using lab-grown diamonds and gemstones.
That's a very impressive background, super interesting and stuff like that. I think before we get more into the diamond business, a couple of questions. Like the first is, you are a highly trained chef. Like you were going to work at a Michelin-star, 3 Michelin-star restaurant. I apologize. So what are out of curiosity, what are 3 things that you as almost a Michelin-trained chef or a Michelin training under a Michelin chef, what are 3 things that you found when you look at a restaurant? What are 3 things that you're like, oh shit, this is stuff that I noticed at a restaurant?
So when I go into a restaurant, the first thing that I decide if I want to go in or not is first looking at the menu. How innovative the person is. I personally have a lot of respect for people who use local produce because of the carbon footprint and also how adaptive they are. I will see what is on the menu that's in season, what is not. I mean, if they don't change their menu often, then I kind of have a question mark for them. I mean, how good are they creatively? Secondly, it's the produce, how difficult it is to source, how difficult it is to cook, how much of a technical side it is. The third thing that I really look at, and I always tell my friend that, how do you create a very good dish? There are things always in contrast, but things never goes in more than 3. So in terms of flavors, you don't have more than 3s. You want contrasting flavors. So for example, if it's sweet, you want a bit of sour to balance it. You can't have more than 3 tastes in there. So let's assume you have bitter, you have spicy, you have sweet, you have salty, you have it's just too much for your tongue. It also everything should kind of ties together, right? It's not just innovative for the sense of innovation. Just now I mentioned contrasting. Textures is also one big thing of it. You have something very tender. You want something very crispy to complement it. If it's very hot, you want something that's a bit cold to complement it. So a very good example is a soup. If it's with croutons, then you have kind of a very thick soup with croutons which are very crunchy, then that's a good contrast. So obviously you should have multiple level on that. There's also a lot of interesting thing that I look out for, right? Cooking techniques. To what extent you're able to use the same ingredient to use multiple way of presenting it. So let's say I have one that is flash pan fried. I have one that is marinated, cured for 30 minutes, and I have something that's cooked for 24 hours. Some at sous vide, some is oven baked, and some is different temperature. And how I could actually present that on a plate that is soothing but not overwhelming. So the rule of 3s. And just now you did mention one of the reasons why I find L'Arpège or Ellen Passade is a dream place for everyone, or at least for me, is because Passade has been so amazing. He had the Michelin-star in meat, in seafood, and again in vegetable. And then I remember one of the dish that always catches my eye is that he had this plate of 3 different carrots and basically tell me that, hey, it's same cooking method, same timing, same seasoning. The only difference is it's sourced from 3 different my own gardens in different parts of Paris, which is showcasing the terroir. And for me, I always have the highest respect for people respecting the produce, because showcasing produce as it is a representation and a respect for nature itself, instead of the nature of disrupting nature.
So you started your career in London and you came back to Hong Kong. Can you talk briefly about the 2 different cultures of finance, of financial professionals there, and then ultimately what kind of made you transition away, right? Because you were at RBS, Credit Suisse, UBS most recently. So what was the culture you found there, and then what led you to basically start your own thing, Diamanté?
Okay, so I guess it's 2-part question.
Yes,
so I'll address one each. So in terms of culture, I think one big thing that I see in the UK versus Hong Kong is the FaceTime culture. In London, it's very usual that you live either in London or all the way to Oxford or something. I do have a colleague who lives in a farmhouse. He has his own school of herd of sheep. He even actually helped the sheep to give birth. That's how crazy and how variety of people is. So people do respect a lot of your family time, do respect you coming to work as work, family is family. They kind of don't infringe into your private life that much, which is one great thing in London. And that's how I also take advantage of it. And I've traveled 27 times in a year.
Wow.
During my time in London, because people do respect your private time. In Hong Kong, it's kind of different. It's a very FaceTime culture. People want to know that you work very hard. We do have a very different culture between Hong Kong and Chinese originated analyst who has very different working culture. Therefore, FaceTime becomes very important. Private time is also less of a thing that people respect in Hong Kong, I would say. They kind of expect you work very late and work during weekends, and yeah, you get my point. So I guess that's a very big difference between Hong Kong and the UK. In terms of what's made me start it off, Diamanté, I guess my advice to a lot of people is starting a business is hard. It takes a lot of effort, and there's a lot of risk associated with it. You do it when you have the ability to take risk, right? So you don't want to start off too old, and the more failure you run into, the more you learn, and the more you adapt. So just start early, right? I mean, doesn't all business has to start with a huge capital? A lot of them could start with very small scale. A lot of them doesn't yield anything. But what you learn is experience itself. So my advice is just go out there, start something completely out of the blue. I mean, it doesn't have to be something grand, right? It can be something just to start off with. Or it can be just as easy as like having some milk tea, right? So, yeah.
Another very Hong Kong business.
How do you value a diamond, actually?
Answer as if you were talking to me. I had no idea. I genuinely have no idea. So what, like the total layman, right? Someone walks into your shop and they're like, I need to get an engagement ring for my girlfriend. She's been giving me a nice suggestion. The time is now. What do I do? What is the thing that I do?
Okay, so I'll break this question into 3 different parts.
Love it.
So the first part I'll address is the difference between lab-grown and natural. The second part I'll break into how do you value a natural diamond versus lab-grown diamond. And the third thing is how do you choose an engagement ring. So first thing, 10-second introductory, what is lab-grown diamond is, it's basically having a very, very small piece of very nice natural diamond, putting it into a greenhouse or an environment with the relevant temperature, atmospheric pressure, and nutrition. It's mimicking exactly how it's being grown under earth. It grows in size. That natural diamond grows in size. And that is what lab-grown is. And therefore, during the process, there is a possibility of worse color and having inclusions in there. However, because it's growing from the natural diamond and it's still carbon and still tetrahedron structure, it's exactly the same. And therefore we value or we grade natural diamond and lab-grown diamond exactly the same.
Sorry. One thing you said, actually, just wanted to clarify. So do you take a piece of natural diamond when you're making the lab-grown diamond? So it's basically, or is it just like pure carbon that you're squeezing at a much faster rate than you would a natural diamond?
So interesting enough is that you wanted to start off with a piece of diamond because at the end of the day, what is diamond? It's crystal. Crystal has a very unique nature that it actually grows in size once the crystal structure is formed. The worst case you want is that it started off with pure carbon and then it's graphite, and what you end up is like a lot of graphite, which is equivalent to what you have in a pen. Then why spend all the energy and capex to it, right? So you start off always with a small piece of diamond to make sure the crystal structure is really right. What you then do is compiling that tetrahedron crystal structure and make it into a much bigger diamond that you can actually craft. Second part of the question, how do you value? So I'm sure a lot of people heard about the 4 C's. So which is color, clarity, cut, and carat size. So I mean, carat size is kind of easy. It's just how big it is. It's the weight. 1 carat equals 0.2 grams. Something to look out for. something called a magic size. Once you cross this size, your price per carat jumps. Minimum 10%, maximum 20, 30, depending how rare it is. So your magic levels are 0.3, 0.5, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 4, 5, etc. So that's the first part.
Okay. Carat.
Okay?
Yeah.
So the second part that I think personally is the most important is cuts. Because at the end of the day, diamond, we are looking at how sparkle it looks, how shiny it is. And therefore it becomes a mathematical question. Right? You're maximizing the fact that light comes in and the maximum light comes out. Right? That's what sparkle is, right? Yeah. And therefore my advice is always go for the best cut that you can find. In this case, the 3 excellence. However, according to GIA definition, they still have a very wide range. And for me, at least at Diamanté, we have all our round diamonds, round brilliance cut with a table size of 57.5 plus minus 1%, crown angle 35 plus minus 1%, and total depth of 62% plus minus 1%. So a very precise criteria for our procurements.
I love it.
Which is why we always say, come to us and we ensure you have some of the best qualities. Because we truly believe that in this method of question, the cut is the most important part. And then this third thing is clarity. And this thing we think are very, very important too. Reason being is, in this mathematical question, when there is some inclusion, it absorbs the light. So the total number, percentage of light that could be reflected out decreases. And therefore, the more inclusion there is, the less shiny the diamond is. At Diamanté, we specialize in VS and VVS. However, we also had a very small selection of SI because it has this very sweet point of good value for money, but you don't really see the inclusion. And once the mounting could cover part of the inclusion, it becomes a VS. So you kind of pay good money for what you get. But essentially, your VS and VVS are good enough that there's no inclusions. Lastly is color. So DFs they're colorless. So most of our stones are DFs, but occasionally we have also Gs. Because G, according to GIA definition, it looks colorless when it's faced up, but slightly yellow when it's faced down. So in terms of value for money, it's definitely up there. But sometimes when you're looking at lab grown, you kind of think, do you want to pay a bit more to get a better quality stone, right? For natural, it's kind of different, right? Mm-hmm. Because that amount of money is not a small amount, right? With lab grown, you're talking about maybe from a few hundred to like a few thousands. That's exactly how much you'd be looking at. With natural, you're talking about 5-figure difference, right? The differences could be. And therefore, it's something to consider on that as well. One thing to look out for is for natural diamonds, it's kind of rare to have we call triple X, it's very good cut, excellent cuts. Reason being is, with lab-grown diamonds, one thing that you can always guarantee is that people are willing to cut away the roughs to make a very nice cut because the price of it is much cheaper. With natural, you're selling it as how much weight it retained. And therefore, when you cut it, you're trying to not cut as much as you should for a perfect cut. And therefore, having a 3 excellent cut, it's usually coming at a much higher premium. And therefore, a lot of people will sometimes comment is, why does lab-grown even look better than natural? If everything is status quo, i.e. the cut is exactly the same and everything's the perfect proportion, it will look exactly the same. However, if you're not having a very high budget and the stone is not cut as well as the lab-grown, then the sparkle will be sacrificed, and that in terms of price, right, or sparkle. So I guess that's one of the major things between lab-grown and natural. And when you value them, those are my criteria, right? Number 1, cut. Number 2, clarity. Number 3, color.
Okay. And carat. Oh, then
carat, right? I mean, carat, how big it is really
your budget. Your budget.
Yeah. Your budget.
Yeah.
And then going to the third part is my advice for engagement ring. I'll throw in a bit of my own philosophy here. Because I think engagement is something very sacred. Engagement is a commitment. And therefore, it's a communication between you and your partner. It doesn't matter if it's lab grown or it's natural. For me, it's a formality. It's a commitment that you tell your partner that, you know what, it's time for us to move on and start planning a bit more serious. And therefore, for me, the ring is more of a symbolic rather than the price or the nature of it. Like some of my friends have just like, they make their own rings. Right? But I think for people who are looking for engagement ring, my first thing is, number one, make sure that's the right person. Right?
Very true.
Make sure that's the right person. Make sure you guys are having good communication. Making sure that you're adaptable and you want to spend your rest of your life with this guy or this girl. Because I think that will be the crux instead of the ring. The ring's just formality. But going from there, I guess, as I mentioned, communication is the key. Because each couple will have their own value. Some will say, I want natural diamonds. Some will say, I'm lab grown. Some will think that I should want to spend more money on the diamond and less on honeymoon or other stuff, right? I want an amazing wedding. I don't want to buy a house. Or I don't need an amazing ring, but I want to have a flat or something according to that. Because life is always choices, right? Life is not infinite resources, and you need to allocate your resources accordingly. I mean, obviously, if you're not having a very serious planning of your life, then obviously you can spend whatever money and wreck your life with debt, but that's not what advised. And therefore, the first thing I always say is communication, right? Make sure you sit down with your partner, rank your priorities, and try to have your financial plan down. Because at the end of the day, this is just a step for you to go to the next step. And if you're still boyfriend and girlfriend, you're kind of like, oh, we're financially independent. But honestly speaking, once you got married, whatever debt the guy racked up, it will still come back to you. So don't think that, oh, the more money he spends, the better it is, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, at the end of the day, having a very grand ring means that you guys have to set back for 3-5 years for your plans. Is it really worth it? So that aside, engagement rings. So for engagement rings, I think the first thing is communicate with your partner. Are they okay with that one? As I said, the reason why I blah about those is because we want to make sure that your partner is aligned with you in terms of how your family is planning financially. If your partner thinks that having a lab grown means that I could release financial resources to achieve other goals that I want, then I say, yes, definitely, go for the lab grown. If you haven't had this conversation, please have the conversation before considering getting engaged, right? Because I think this is a very important thing. If the final answer is you guys decided a natural diamond is what you want, then go for it. If lab-grown diamond gives you the financial flexibility for other things, then go for lab-grown diamond. But essentially, I think this is communication is key. About the size, color, cut, clarity, I think all these is really a conclusion of what just came. As I told you how I would have ranked a diamond, maybe someone would have ranked it differently. And therefore, I think it's really up to your partner. And therefore, going back, it's really just having this open communication with your partner and making sure that she is getting what she wants. Because hopefully that will only happen once in her life and you want to make it right. And therefore, just make sure that communication's there. I think that's what my advice would be.
Well, it's great. And first, can I just say I can really tell that you're a finance guy because you're like very exacting on the diamond shapes, the cuts, and everything. It's exactly that percentage. So, being a finance guy or being a former finance guy, let's just talk numbers, right? Like we're talking about kind of difference between diamonds. So like purely on number basis, what is the difference between a 1 carat natural on all the same things, like a natural versus a lab grown diamond? And then I think the other question I guess many people have is like, can you actually tell the difference? And not just between lab grown and natural. Like if a diamond, for example, so VVS is the higher color, right? Or clarity. Sorry, it's higher clarity. VVS is higher clarity versus VS. Can you actually tell? Like if you look at it, you're like, oh, like in out and about, can you tell? Or can you be like, oh, this I can tell is 2.4 and then 2.5. So actually, would you, if you're trying to like get a an R, basically get a better deal, right? You're just like, oh, actually, I'll look specifically for 2.4 because the increment will go better. So yeah, just curious on that.
So in terms of prices, I think roughly guiding 1/10 of natural is kind of where you think it's where it should be. So if we're looking at like a DVS, I mean, a natural, you're talking somewhere in the range of 70K to all the way to like 130K honky.
Okay.
In terms of lab grown, we're talking roughly around 6,800.
Do you mind using US dollars?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Just because international.
It's roughly, let's say, 1K US dollar.
Okay.
Right? So in terms of its natural, then we're talking about 10 to 20K US dollars.
Okay.
So 1/10 the price. So I think with Diamanté, even with good 1 carat DVVS2, we're selling at less than 10K. We're like around 800, 700 something. I mean, for people who are in the US, we do ship global because I have checked the US market. My prices is roughly half of what you're buying in the US. So
Go right there.
Your deals
Got
now.
you, bro. Got you.
So yeah, I mean, I do think US is a very different market. We'll talk about that later on, and we're talking about some of the reason behind that as well. But in terms of pricing, roughly guiding 1/10 the price. With larger carats, the price difference will be even more. Reason being is the rarer it gets, the price gets completely exponential, and the rate of exponentiality in natural is much higher than lab grown, and therefore, I think with larger carat, the lab grown gives you even higher value. The even higher value is the color diamonds with the very rare ones, the blues, the pinks. On average, you will definitely be paying less than 5% of the original price. For this baby here, we will probably talking about is a 5.56 fancy pink diamond. If it's natural, we're talking about something like 1 million USD, a rough give or take. And in Diamanté, this is roughly translating to like maybe like 250K. So 2.5% of what you'll be paying. So I think with color diamonds, it's very special. It's something also slightly pricey, but at the end of the day, it's very, very pretty. And for a lot of people, they would not be able to afford the natural version of it. And therefore, we think lacquer is a very good alternative. So one thing that we get a lot is, can you tell the difference? Because people always come to my shop and said, "Oh, if you can't tell the difference, why can't you just buy one and just pawn it off and I make a difference?" So can you tell from naked eye? No. Can you tell with loop? No. Can a veteran who worked for like 40 years tell from naked eye or even with loop? No. The way how they are able to tell is how you dress. Does it matches the ring? No. Then they will doubt. It's too perfect. Does it match you? You don't drive in a Rolls Royce, but you have a 5 carat DVS2. Yeah, probably it's lab grown or you stole it from someone, right? But the way how you actually tell it, I always say it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like trees. If you go to your normal parks, those are the fast growing trees. What happens if you cut it in half? You'll see how you actually see how old the tree is by how many circles there are. And one way to tell how fast growing it is how regular or how thick it's each circle from each other. If you look to auction house, a lot of the very old woods, like your Zitan or Leifamo, those ones, you'll see the circles are very irregular. They're very compact because they take thousands, hundreds of years to grow. They're very irregular. Similar with diamonds. If you magnify it with 1,000 times, you'll see the growth mark. The growth mark will determine whether it's a lab grown or it's a natural. Hence, we go back to the same argument. It's too perfect. It's pro lab grown. That's how people look at it. And one thing that we get a lot of as well is, oh, does it come as a GIA? I think the first thing that I will ask is, if you go to an auction house, Christie's or Sotheby's, when you buy an emerald or ruby or sapphire, which is the cert there's out there? Most of the time, it's Gerberlin, GRS, SSFR. GI is not on there. Why? Because in order to become the authority of that specific subsegment, you're basically having the largest database, right? The more you rank, the better you are, like most things in life. GIA has the largest database for natural diamonds, hence they're the authority of it. With lab-grown diamond, it's a company called IGI. They have the largest database. So according to that logical propagation, we here deal mostly with IGI. But if a customer who wants a GIA, sure, we'll always take it offline and cater for that.
So in summary, right, you can't tell the difference between a lab-grown or a natural diamond. In most settings, unless you really look closely, you can't really tell the difference between, say, a VVS versus a VS, unless you just based on how they tell. And then going back to what you mentioned before is the people that can tell you what it is are these third-party kind of rating services. So GIA, which is the Gemological Institute of America, which is like the most famous, is for natural diamonds. And that's, you get a little form when you buy it, and then that's how you know. And then to your point, for lab-grown, it's something ISI? Sorry, what was
IGI.
it? IGI. And that's how basically for lab-grown, you're like, this is what you're paying for.
Exactly.
Awesome. So what are some perceptions of natural diamonds versus lab-grown diamonds around the world?
So I think around the world is kind of interesting. As we always know, US always lead the trend. So US so far, from the last 3 years, has grown from penetration rate in terms of natural diamonds versus lab-grown. Lab-grown have gone from like low double digit to up to like 60-70% now.
Wow.
In the last 3 years. That's how crazy the market is. For Hong Kong, it roughly goes from high single digit last year to now I estimate around 20-ish to 30%.
Really?
Okay.
In a year, yes. Some of the lowest adoption rate is Japan.
Of course.
Surprise, surprise, right? They has been always a very branded and kind of conservative society. So, but we're seeing a bit of volume picking up from some of the natural dealers who's trying to start ramping up that business. Europe has been trailing. I think it's somewhere between Hong Kong and US, same for Australia. We're also seeing a lot of pickup in terms of Southeast Asia. And I think it's kind of interesting where globally everyone's trying to perceive lab-grown versus natural. As I said, we're very, very early on. I mean, lab-grown is not new. Lab-grown has been around for a long time, and people or natural sellers have always portrayed lab-grown as fake. But as the FTCs in the US have classified lab-grown as real diamonds, I think the global perception has been always in line, and more people are accepting lab-grown. And I mean, a lot of the customers are not willing to pay 10 times the price for something looking exactly the same. So we're seeing a lot more adoption globally, and it has been a very fast market in terms of penetration rate and how fast it grows.
Wow, I mean, to be honest with you, like I'm very surprised like Hong Kong is that high. But actually, so we talked a bit about like the trend of, you know, what's happening in, you know, US and Asia, but what are like the purchasing differences of like, you know, the average buyer in Japan versus an average buyer in Hong Kong versus an average buyer in mainland China? Like what are you seeing?
So let's talk about US, because US makes up 90% of the market. And interesting enough, during the Christmas season, they basically have dried out the whole global supply of 2 to 4 carats.
Wow.
It's Christmas time. I mean, US tends to have this more outgoing and bling bling culture, which they don't mind telling people that they're wearing lab grown and they're proud to be wearing lab grown. And they think, if I'm buying lab grown, why not like a 3 carat, 4 carat? So during Christmas time, like from like end of November all the way up to like Valentine's Day, when you're buying from the market 2 carat to 4 carats, especially rounds, they're completely out of the market. You have your Valentine's,
Wow.
you have your Christmas. Everyone's just like on big purchase. That's how crazy US are. In terms of Hong Kong, I think people are still a bit behind the curve, and they tend to concentrate mainly around the 1.5 to 2.5 segment. The reason being is Hong Kong is a very wealthy society, and a lot of people could afford a 2 carat natural ring. And therefore the general perception is more like, I'm getting something not so out of line that I get suspected as a lab grown, and I don't tell unless I was being asked, but I still get away with being the perception of wearing like a legit natural ring. With China, I think it's kind of interesting. China, it's so varied, but obviously, like most economy, your 1 carat always sells the best. Your largest carat, like 10 carats, 20 carats, are the least. But you still have a very affluent class in China who are willing to spend like millions just to get like 10, 20 carats, 30 carats, right? And hence, I think China is more difficult to pinpoint. But I think most or every single society market out there, definitely your 1 carat will always be your best selling because 1 carat is easy to carry. Like the first studs a lady get was probably like a round 1 carat studs. So those always sells the easiest and the best, right? In terms of different markets, I think with Japan, they all like to have a more cute and dainty design. So they tend to have like very small star melee design, less than 1 carat, and they're still very slowly adapted.
One thing you mentioned there, sorry, just out of curiosity, you mentioned that the U.S., especially during Christmas, lead up to Christmas and Valentine's Day, are one of the big like times that you can't find diamonds. So does the same thing exist in Asia? You find like, for example, during Chinese New Year or mid-autumn, there's a huge spike in demand or purchases, or is it just random based on engagement? Like what is the purchase of the market? Does it have a similar trend?
I think with all industry, there is a seasonality. And this seasonality doesn't apply just for lab grown. It applies to natural diamonds. It applies to most of the jewelry. It's just naturally how our purchasing habits are. And therefore, I don't see this as a very specific to lab grown.
But like purchase for diamonds in general.
Purchase for diamond in general, your high season is kind of like your October all the way to like Valentine's, Easter's kind of thing. Then it dies down, you kind of rest for a few more months, and then people get back to work. I guess even for cars, they're kind of like a similar thing as well. It kind of ties in with your bonus seasons, kind of boils down to your bonus seasons when you're getting paid and some of the big days that you want to get in. I mean, birthdays kind of like all year round, but your Valentine's, your engagements, your Christmas, those are the big days.
No, dude, I love a little bit of extra liquidity to buy.
Absolutely. So that was an excellent analysis. Let me ask you this question. What's the number one reason why someone would buy a lab-grown diamond?
I can't pinpoint what's number one,
Okay.
but I'll talk about some of the factors out there. Number one, ESG. With lab-grown diamond, you don't have to concern about child labor, blood diamond, pollution to ecosystem, to water tables. Those are some of the biggest concerns a lot of people have because it's just green, right? You can always authenticate how it's made. I mean, it's very unlikely that you need to kill a child to build a factory, right? Whereas I'm sure everyone would have watched The Blood Diamond,
yes,
and we've known a lot of how natural diamonds have fueled a lot of civil wars and warlords and a lot of unethical things being done. Second thing is like what we just talked about, financial planning. Lab-grown release a lot of financial resources for a couple, whether it's purchasing a house, having a more luxurious honeymoon, or even have a grander wedding. Those are always some of the factors that people look at. And one thing, the last thing that I think it's always something that it's also crucial is that with the same amount of money, you're able to get a bigger, cleaner, or higher clarity, higher color, better cut diamond. And it looks exactly the same. Why not? I think it's also a realization of customer who suddenly wake up to the fact that, oh well, they're exactly the same. So why am I purchasing something 10 times the price?
No, I think you're totally right. And as you mentioned before, unless you look at the GIA form, you have literally no idea to know, the size, the color, the clarity, and everything else. Before we go to our final questions, I have one kind of curiosity question is like, what is the most interesting experience, customer, client coming into the shop, like that you felt that you dealt with that you're like, oh, or did you ever have like someone like coming to you to buy a diamond for an engagement ring, you met the couple and you're like, oh shit, you guys really shouldn't be getting married. I'm just curious, like you've seen people at one of the biggest inflection points in their life, like what is a very, like you find very interesting story, like something that sticks out in your mind that you've experienced?
So I will share 3 different instances. The first one that you asked about, usually as the guy comes in, it's always this consultation session, which I give the guy asking those questions I just talked about. Have you make sure you have good communication? Are your lady okay with it? Like, I don't want to do your business unless you're properly insured and vetted, because I don't want to have my business at the expense of your relationship, right? And as couples, kind of interesting because usually when the couple comes in, the lady's already all right. So it kind of comes down to the point where just the lady will make sure that Diamond's okay, and then she kind of wants a bit of surprise. So she will leave early and the guy will pick a final design kind of thing.
Man.
But given guidance, like,
Of course.
I like a full point.
Given,
Yeah, I like that. Giving guidance, some hints.
Exactly. They don't want it too far off from what they wanted, but they still want a bit of surprise. And I think the most interesting, it's also coming back to what one of our biggest strengths is. A lot of our customer, after knowing that our craftsmanship is very good, we actually bounce off a lot in terms of the designs that we come up with. So a lot of our designs that you see today, it's because it's really coming from a customer. We tell them that these are what we're good at, these are things that we can do. And she was like, can I have this? Can I have that? Can I add all these together? And like just throwing me a really hard questions. And for me, I just treat it as fun because I love building Lego. I like problem solving. And I'm like, okay, let's do it together. And that's why, as I said, we're developing those who could like have 5 different ways of wearing an earring. It could become a ring, become a pendant. The earring could be wear 3 different ways. All this stuff. It's just something that it really comes from the customer, and we really enjoy that because not just push us to our limit, it increase our competitive moat. It also become a very good loyalty thing because what you make in our shop, it's what our shop is comparable with. If you go to another shop, you buy it off shelf, you go to like your high street brands, they will never be able to cater to your needs. And once you bought your first item that has our signature designs, you just kind of like upgrade to the next one and you build it into a collection. So for us, that's where we're good at. That's what we like to do. And that's where the very interesting interaction between us and customers comes in as well.
And then have you ever said to anyone like, oh, maybe you should reconsider, like during engagement?
I mean, I don't think I'm in the position to say that.
No.
But I'll always throw a question at for them to think about.
Got it.
Very good consultation. Very good consultation. And I think, Jay showed me some of the stuff that you've done. And then obviously I've looked at it. It's like, it's amazing. Like, the customization, what you can build. It's like a joke. It's like a transformer diamond, right? You can just transform it to all these things. But before we get to the last questions, you want to add anything else or?
Yeah, just a final question. Is there like an average size for like diamonds across Asia or the US that people generally tend to gravitate towards? I know you mentioned the 1 carat sells really well, but is there like a size essentially?
So we have to break down into the usage of what that is,
okay, very
right?
true.
So for earrings, right, having 1 carat is a very good, decent size. Some of like 0.5. I mean, some depending on the shape of your earring, of your ear. Right? Can your ear take a larger diamond?
Okay.
Built for this diamond dog.
So, and therefore for earrings, it's usually 1 carat. Some of them like 2 carats, but it really depends on the shape.
Got
Obviously, if you have a 3 carat, then it will be like, you need a very large
ear
for it
to handle that.
Yeah. So for rings, specifically, rings usually what happened in Hong Kong is 1.5 to 2.5 carats because you're gravitating towards natural. For US, people are very open about having lab grown, so they are willing to go crazy, like 2 carats all the way to like 5, 6, 7, 8 carats, right?
Wow.
With different market, it really depends on how the adoption rate. Obviously, the higher the penetration rate, higher the size go. So in terms of ring, it really depends on the culture.
Got it.
Of Japan, of the country. So for Japan, on the other hand, natural usually had like 0.1 carat.
0.1.
So a lot of the high street brands that is in Japan, in Tokyo, they are selling like natural like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, which is understandable,
Right.
Because the culture is more conservative and the average disposable income in Japan is much less than in Hong Kong as well. And therefore, it makes sense in terms of the size and the daintiness and the cuteness comes through in the culture as well, and that's where it is.
Gotcha.
So we'll just go to some of the last questions we have. It's kind of what we usually go for everyone. So what are you streaming like on, podcasts you like, obviously besides Trends? I'm kidding. But what podcasts you're listening to, YouTube that you shows you're streaming, Netflix, like what are you streaming? What do you think is interesting?
So to be honest, it really depends on what I'm into at those times.
Mm.
Like I remember during my time at Le Cordon Bleu, I was literally just watching all the celebrity chefs and choosing some of the best chefs I like and just learning exactly replicating what they do, right? And trying to learning it by doing. So like Raymond Blanc is some of my favorite. Michel Rouge is someone I love a lot. Passat. So I just keep on reading them. For now, what do I read a lot is a lot of the brand stories. Right? At the end of the day, having a B2B business and a B2C business is very different. The perception of consumers is also very different. So what I like is just like go on YouTube, just search, history of Rolex, history of Hermes, history of Harry Winston, history of Cartier, Tiffany, and see how they actually go from someone who's nobody into today's position. Obviously, they took hundreds of years to reach where they are, but some of the brands that I think it's a bit more inspirational is, for example, APM, right? They took a brand from Monaco and just manufactured in China and branded as a royalty brand. I think those are the things that I'm kind of lacking, and depending on the stage of where I am, I kind of focus on what I lack. So I know I'm not exactly answering a question, but my personal podcast or go-to place is literally things that I feel where I'm at the moment.
I like that you're always trying to grow. So it feeds into my next question, right? So, which is, what is one piece of advice you'd give yourself when you started your career?
I think a lot of people already be doing it, but if I speaking to myself like back in uni, my advice is don't save, just go party.
I love it. I love it.
I mean, because I think at the end of the day, in this world, it's not really about how good you are. It's really about how many connections you have.
Yes.
How can you leverage? Like, at the end of the day, I don't need to be amazing in accounting. If I know someone who's amazing in accounting, they could help me in terms of my accounting. Obviously, having the technicality is good, but nothing suits better than understanding human. So my advice is just go spend money, go clubbing, just do whatever you want, and just meet a lot of people and just be friends and just understand human better. Because at the end of the day, doing business is human. So understanding how different people think, how to make people feeling comfortable and wanting to trust you. I think that is something that no one teaches. Almost impossible to learn. You could only keep learn by trial and error. So that is a piece of advice that I'll give.
I think the last thing, is there anything else you'd like to plug, what you're doing? Anything else? I mean, obviously plug the business and everything else, but just maybe share anything else you want to share with our audience and stuff.
So one thing that I would share is don't be afraid to fail. Because the more you fail, it means the nearer you are to success, right? In Chinese, we had a proverb called 失败乃成功之母. So it means that the more you fail, the closer you are to success. Because by elimination, you kind of rule out what doesn't work and what works for you. Second advice is really understand yourself. Because you might think yourself as A, and in reality, you're B. Obviously, I'm not saying that you should only focus on what you're good at, but if you don't understand yourself, you don't even know what to work on that's not good at. So understanding yourself is very, very important. Third thing that I would say is do not comply to status quo. Make sure you just go out there and be very open-minded. Like, I personally do like to travel a lot. Sometimes I solo travel, and I always just talk to people who's next to me. I remember my train ride from Paris to Bordeaux. I met a CEO of a culinary school. He then invited me to have lunch with him. I just run into some very, very interesting experience by just talking to people. So really step out of your comfort zone, talk to strangers. You never know what sort of information you'll get. I, every day, take Uber and I talk to my Uber drivers. Very interesting conversation you will stem out of it. Just don't be afraid and don't just think that this is my world, because the world is very, very big. Tying that to this, it's probably also, we'll be giving out some of the gifts for this podcast. For people who are in Hong Kong, we will be giving out 10 pairs of Diamond Masterclass. Be open-minded, come and have fun, and just learn about what lab-grown diamond is.
Nice.
At the end of the day, knowledge is power. So the more you learn, the better it is. For international viewers, I mean, we will be running some Zoom sessions later. So do drop a line in the comment section and we know how to reach out to you guys. And lastly, we will be giving out 2 lab-grown gemstones.
Beautiful
A
gemstones.
1.5 carat sapphire and a 1 carat ruby. So just comment below, just said Diamanté and tag us on Instagram. By the end of July, we'll select those lucky participants who have followed us and posted us on their stories for 24 hours. And from there, we'll select the lucky. And we'll be in touch.
Yeah, we'll have some more information about like the rules and stuff. So follow our social media, obviously follow Diamanté social media. But anyway, Brian, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. As you said, knowledge is power. It was super helpful, beautiful, very beautiful. Thanks so much for coming by, and yeah, we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers.